Welcome into Steelers Talk. I'm your host, Jack Sperry, and today we're going to be doing a little bit of a spotlight piece on defensive coordinator for the Pittsburgh Steelers, Teryl Austin. And could the Pittsburgh Steelers bring him back and sign him to a new contract this offseason, because his contract does expire at the end of this year? After Pittsburgh's second-half turnaround, does it make sense for Pittsburgh to bring back their DC, or should they consider bringing somebody else in to be the new defensive coordinator of the Pittsburgh Steelers? We're going to have that discussion here today on Steelers Talk. So before we get into the content today, make sure you guys click that subscribe button for all the latest surrounding the Pittsburgh Steelers this offseason. If Pittsburgh makes coaching changes this year, if we get a new defensive coordinator, if they fire Pat Meyer, which would be crazy after the way that the offensive line is playing, or Arthur Smith, or whatever ends up happening, if Mike Tomlin surprisingly decides to leave the Steelers, we're going to have it all covered for you guys this year. We'll also have extensive coverage of free agency, trades, the draft this year. So if you guys want to keep tabs on everything the Pittsburgh Steelers are doing this offseason, make sure you guys click that subscribe button if you haven't already. So like I said at the top of today's show, guys, Teryl Austin, the current defensive coordinator here of the Pittsburgh Steelers, his contract expires after this year. And usually the way the Steelers, do business with their coordinators under Mike Tomlin as their head coach is they usually let their contracts expire, and then, they kind of assess it at that point. They very rarely fire coaches early. They have exceptions, Matt Canada, for example, but there's going to be a decision that has to be made on Teryl Austin this offseason. And listen, man, it's been a very disappointing year, just generally speaking, defensively for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Look at where this team ranks in a lot of these categories, and, this team heading into the year was talking about, we're going to do historic things, and we're going to be top 3 in every category, and we're going to be dominant, and it just hasn't been the case. They've been pretty good in the red zone. They've been pretty darn good taking the football away, but that's really been about it in terms of the grand picture of the season, because in the first half, this Steelers defense was terrible. They were siphoning off yards. They couldn't stop the run. They were giving up close to 30 points a game. This was a bad defense in the first half of the season. But just generally speaking here, in the Teryl Austin era, when, by the way, this defense has consistently been one of, if not the most expensive defense in professional football, they're right around league average. And from 2022 to 2025, this is what the Steelers rank in. All right, they're around league average in EPA per play allowed. They're technically top 10 in success rate. They're 12th in EPA per drop back, and then 20th in EPA per rush. Those are pretty pedestrian numbers for a team that spends a lot of money on the defensive side of the ball. You can make an argument that Teryl Austin hasn't been, holding up his end of the bargain in terms of, getting this defense to perform the way that it needs to be if you're going to spend as much money as you do on this side of the football. And you guys can see where the Steelers have ranked in points per game, EPA per play, and success rate over the course of the Teryl Austin era here since 2022. And, it's been okay. It seemed like you were progressively getting better. 2023 was definitely this team's best season defensively. You were really starting to get things going at the end of 2022. That culminates in a really good 2023. Austin ends up getting a second contract here in Pittsburgh after that season. And then last year, you have a great start and then not so great of a finish on defense. And then this year, not so great to start and then kind of middling towards the end. But this defense has gotten a lot better in the second half, and we'll talk about that later in the show. But, guys, these numbers with the most expensive defense in professional football suggest Pittsburgh should let Teryl Austin walk and then find a new defensive coordinator to lead this group and call the defensive plays moving forward. However, this Steelers defense has turned a corner here late in the 2025 season, and they've been playing some pretty darn good football down the stretch, especially over the last month. We're seeing this pass rush come alive. We're seeing, Joey Porter Jr. and James Pierre lock people down in coverage. The linebacker play has been better. And you guys can see in the first half of the season, this defense was absolutely, maybe not, complete dumpster fire terrible, but they were, around borderline top 20. Now they're borderline like top 12 or, at least top 15. They are an above average defense at this point in the season. And, to kind of do the kind of surgery that they did on this roster and on this defense midway through the season and then find a way to have some success in the second half of the year is commendable, especially when you take a look at the last month here. The Pittsburgh Steelers are 5th in points per game allowed in the last month. They're also 6th in success rate allowed, and, their run defense is top 5 in the league over the last month, okay? So this has been a group that has really turned a corner. And then specifically, before the fourth quarter, this Steelers defense is one of the best in football, all right? Now, they've given up some pretty big fourth quarters over the last month to Detroit and then to, of course, the Baltimore Ravens, which have skewed the numbers a little bit. But when you go just the first 3 quarters over the last 4 games, last 4 weeks, the Pittsburgh Steelers are pretty much top 5 in all of the key metrics that you look at. They're getting teams off the field. They are getting after the quarterback. They're playing good coverage. Now, in the fourth quarter, sometimes, some of these quarterbacks like Jared Goff and Lamar Jackson have toasted them a little bit. When the game, they have to start throwing the ball a little bit more, and that's something the Steelers defense needs to clean up. But even more here, guys, Pittsburgh's defensive turnaround, it's not just happening, in a vacuum where, the defense hasn't changed at all. The players are just playing better. No, Teryl Austin and Mike Tomlin actively performed surgery on this roster midway through the season and completely changed their defensive philosophy midway through the year, and it has led to the results that we're seeing here where the Pittsburgh Steelers defense is playing their best football of the season when it matters most as we approach the NFL playoffs this week. And, the original vision for this defense was, we're going to man everybody up. Jalen Ramsey's going to shut people down. Darius Slay going to shut people down. Joey Porter Jr. going to shut people down. We're just going to man up everybody. We're going to blitz. We're going to put pressure on the quarterback, and our coverage on the back end with our cornerbacks are going to be so good, nobody's going to be able to get jack shit on this defense. Well, guess what? Jalen Ramsey, not a great man corner anymore, and neither was Darius Slay. In fact, both of them are pretty I won't say Ramsey's cooked, but, he is diminishing as an athlete, and then Darius Slay is just straight up cooked at this point in time. And they had to completely change the way that this defense, went about its business because, with the coverage being as bad as it was, offenses were just getting the ball out super fast, completely negating the talent on the Steelers' defensive front. The linebackers weren't playing good in run defense. Keanu Benson was playing really poorly, in run defense as well. Couldn't stop the run. He couldn't cover anybody, and it led to, a really bad defense in the first half of the year. But then they completely overhaul their secondary in the middle of the season, okay? You start the season with Joey Porter Jr. He's fine. He stayed in that spot all season long. But then, Darius Slay, who was a complete disaster, you cut bait with him and you address that problem, and you bring in James Pierre, who has been one of the best corners in football since he joined the defense. Then at nickel, you start the season with Jalen Ramsey, and honestly, Ramsey was okay playing nickel, but they move him to safety and they get rid of Juan Thornhill's ass, okay, and then Deshaun Elliott gets injured, and then you end up doing this little shuffle here where you put Brandon Echols, who has been a really great signing for the Steelers this year, in the slot, and he's been really good as your starting slot guy. Then you have Jalen Ramsey, and then you trade for Kyle Duggar after the Deshaun Elliott injury, and, Jalen and Kyle have been a really good safety duo. Now, I would say Duggar over the last 2 games in particular hasn't been phenomenal, but, that's been, a pretty decent safety tandem in the second half of the year. Also, Pittsburgh shifted to a more zone and match heavy scheme. They started the year playing so much cover 1 and so much man coverage, and they were just getting absolutely obliterated. You have to give some credit to Mike Tomlin and Teryl Austin for identifying the problems with this defense and then, finding some solutions, not only in terms of personnel, but also in terms of scheme. They're playing a lot more too high pre-snap looks in the second half of the season, which has allowed the Steelers to be a little bit more ambiguous before the snap. They can do their post-snap rotations, get into Tampa or cover 3 or quarters, or even cover 1 from the two high safety pre-snap alignments, and What that does, guys, is it forces quarterbacks to hold the ball a little bit longer. It forces them to read the defense post-snap, and it gives the Steelers' pass rush, which is really good, more time to get after quarterbacks, and that's why you're seeing the Steelers' defense perform better in the second half of the season than in the first half of the season. And yes, the coaching does deserve credit for it. I mean, this is a tandem here in Mike Tomlin and Teryl Austin that just gets obliterated for quote-unquote never making adjustments. They made not only personnel adjustments, but also schematic adjustments in the middle of a season, and it worked. All right, that is commendable, and that is something that is worthy of a pat on the back. However, there is a DC candidate out there that I think is going to be really tough for the Steelers to pass up on if the Steelers can realistically get him, and it might mean Teryl Austin's time in Pittsburgh. Although, the second half effort in this year's season has been commendable, it might still be time to move on if you can get a high-end DC prospect. But before we get into who that is, make sure you guys get down there in the comment section and let me know. Should Teryl Austin be back next year as the defensive coordinator of the Pittsburgh Steelers? Give me a yes or no down there in the comment section. This will be the pinned comment on today's show. So in just a second here, I'm going to tell you about our sponsor today. And while I tell you about our sponsor, simply give me a yes or a no down there in the comment section. And with that, if you guys want to celebrate the 2025 AFC North Championship for your Pittsburgh Steelers, we've got officially licensed AFC North Championship gear on our website right now. When you guys go to chatsports.com/AFC North, we've got the 2 officially licensed t-shirts as well as the officially licensed division championship hat. Of course, all this stuff was worn by the players and coaches last Sunday night. At least it's the same, you guys get what I'm saying. They're not actually worn by the players, but like it's the same stuff that was worn by the players on Sunday night when they won the division championship. And every single purchase helps us out, guys. When you click our link, chatsports.com/AFC North, we get part of the proceeds of that purchase. So that helps us pay rents and, buy new graphics packages and raffle items and all that fun stuff that keeps this content free for you guys right here on YouTube. So again, chatsports.com/AFC North to make it happen. And the guy that I was referring to as maybe the can't-miss defensive coordinator candidate that's out there now is former Atlanta head coach Raheem Morris. And it's actually pretty realistic that the Steelers could land him if they want him as their next defensive coordinator, specifically because of his ties to head coach Mike Tomlin. Now, I know what you guys are saying at home. I'm tired of Tomlin, hiring his friends. Well, that's what every coach does, first of all. It's not about what you know, it's about who you know. I mean, that's not just football, that's in every business. But, Raheem Morris is, a really great coach, and there's a lot of great players in this league that have complimented him, and he's a legit defensive coordinator. When he's just allowed to just sit there, game plan for a defense, and then call defensive plays, he's really good at it. It's what got him the opportunity in Atlanta in the first place because he was doing such a good job with the Los Angeles Rams. And, he's coached in pretty much every single scheme you could think of. The Tampa 2 under Monty Kiffin. By the way, that's where he met Mike Tomlin, was working for Tony Dungy and John Gruden there with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. But, he's coached under Dan Quinn, with the Seattle 3 style of defense. He coached under Brandon Staley when he brought the quarters and cover 6 stuff to LA, and that's what he ran as DC there in LA. Like, this guy has a wide array of experience, and Raheem also has connections to more people in this organization, not named Mike Tomlin as well. Jalen Ramsey also has a big connection to Raheem, where Jalen is actually on record saying that Raheem Morris is the greatest coach he's ever had. The exact quote was, "Ra is the best coach I've ever had, and I've had some great ones." So, Jalen Ramsey, who's almost assuredly going to be back next year with the way his contract is structured here in Pittsburgh, he would certainly love for Raheem Morris to be his defensive coordinator again here in Pittsburgh. And, another thing that he said on Twitter a couple years ago was, Falcons got one of, if not the best coach in the NFL for real. That was him reacting to the news of Morris getting the job in Atlanta. And then he also quote tweeted that one by saying, "It ain't just me who thinks this. Ask any player who he has played for Rob, and they'll tell you the same thing. So he's a good defensive coordinator, guys, who just happens to have a connection to Mike Tomlin. And, if you feel like you can get him, I think he would be an upgrade over Teryl Austin. I think Austin's done a commendable job helping to fix this defense midseason, but I think with the underperformance of the last 4 years in this defense, to be quite frank with you, if you can get a guy like Raheem Morris, who's an elite defensive coordinator candidate, I think I would hire him. And some other guys that are now out there that, might, be, strike Mike Tomlin's fancy is a future DC here in Pittsburgh, Jim Schwartz, who has been in the division, and he actually coaches a man-heavy defense better than anybody in football. So if that's what Mike Tomlin's vision is for this Steelers defense, Schwartz makes a lot of sense, although I'm guessing he probably follows Stefanski to wherever he goes. But Jeff Ulbrich, I'm guessing, would come pretty highly recommended by Raheem Morris, so if Raheem goes somewhere else, I'm sure Ulbrich will be highly recommended by him. Patrick Graham is somebody that I've admired for many years. I think he's elevated that Raiders defense that has had no talent on it for years at this point. I really like his scheme diversity that he's put together in Las Vegas over the last several years. It's just a shame they've never given him any talent outside of Max Crosby. Joe Witt Jr. Helped lead the Commanders to an NFC Championship game last year. He was recently fired by the Commanders. And then Brian Flores, if he doesn't get a head coaching job this year, his contract expires in Minnesota. Would he like to come to Pittsburgh, work for Mike Tomlin again, and be the heir apparent to Mike Tomlin to be the next head coach of the Pittsburgh Steelers while, getting his feet wet as the DC? It's probably very unlikely. I think he's going to get a head coaching job, but it's an interesting idea for sure. And if the Steelers can bring Coach Flo back, I certainly would be on board. But let me know what you guys think down there in the comment section. Who do you want as Pittsburgh's defensive coordinator next year? Do you want Teryl Austin back? Would you like to bring in Raheem Morris? Would you like to bring in somebody else? Let me know what you guys think down there in the comment section. And that'll be it for today's edition of Steelers Talk by Chat Sports. I appreciate all of your guys' support. We will be getting you guys more Wildcard Week coverage all throughout this week, so make sure you guys click that subscribe button if you haven't already. And until next time, guys, here we go, Steelers.